What's up guys, Tails A6 here with Weekly Review, and today we're going to be doing the history of Nintendo video that I've been promising y'all for as my 100th video, and we're going to be doing it in 4 parts. We're going to show off first the NES, the SNES, then we're going to go through in the second part, we're going to make it the N64, the GameCube. Part 3 will be showing off the Nintendo Wii, and as well as the handhelds. And part 4 will just basically finish off the video. So I hope you guys are ready for my wonderful world of my wonderful walkthrough of the history of Nintendo, all the way back to the NES, all the way to the Wii that we have now, and for the upcoming 3DS that is supposedly coming out sometime this year. So stay tuned, guys. It's really amazing to see that a lot of video game consoles have come and gone, but there are certain ones that still stick around in our minds for all of us who were born back in the 1980s and 70s, who got to relive their childhood by playing some of the greatest games that was ever made for video game consoles. Now, of course, this is the Atari flashback, and we're not talking about Atari, but this was one of the very first game systems that revolutionized the gaming industry. Of course, there were other consoles, like the very first one that was made, which was the Odyssey, which was made back in the I think it's about 75 was when it came out, if not a little bit later than that. But this was one of the first video game consoles that came out. Now, of course, everyone knows around the 1980s there was the video game crash, and only 3 competitors were still standing, which were the Atari 2600, the Sega Master System, and the sexy beast known as the Nintendo Entertainment System. This beast was beautiful. When it arrived to North America, it was known, as you can see right here, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Over in Japan, it was known as the Nintendo Famicom. Now, of course, the design was completely changed from the way the Famicom looked. The controllers were on both top, and it had microphones on the inside of the controllers. Unlike the NES controller, it had it so you had the simple basic buttons and controls. You had a simple D-pad, select, start, B, and A buttons. Now, of course, they made other controllers for the NES, like the NES Max, the NES Advantage, and tons of different other ones. Now, one of the things that's really cool about this system, though, is when it first came out, a lot of people looked at it with envy because they noticed that this was an 8-bit. Atari, when they came out, was around in the 4-bit to about maybe 6-bit era. But then, shortly after that, Nintendo rose from the ashes from the video game crash and made it so everyone could be able to carry around their games and be able to carry around their system just to use regular AV cables, as you can see on the back and the side right here. Now, of course, if you didn't have that, you also had a coax cable, the RF adapter that you could also go ahead and plug into it straight in. And you could also use a coax cable to be able to plug it in. Now, one of the cool things about the NES also was, just like the Atari 2600, it had it so you could be able to use cartridges. Now, these were very revolutionary at the time, and I'm just showing off one of them that I have. This one is Gyruss, as you guys know from one of my my NES review of Gyruss. And one of the cool things about the system, though, was all you had to do was just slide the games in, pop it down, and then power it on. Now, one of the other things that was actually kind of cool about this is all the games were used with 72-pin connectors, the same way as the original system. Now, of course, the original Nintendo is very hard to find, and also they are not always guaranteed to last forever. Thankfully, I've been lucky to be able to still have this one. I've had this one since my childhood and all that, so But there were tons and tons of games that came out for the NES. Certain ones that had different cartridges, like you see this one is just plain gray. We had some that were black, some were gold, some were silver, some were clear, like Activision, excuse me, the crap, I cannot remember that name now, the game. Oh, the shit, I cannot remember what it's called, but it was a really horrible game. Oh, Action 52. There we go. I don't know why I was thinking Activision, but one of the worst games that was ever made was Action 52 for the NES. But there were tons of other ones. There was, of course, Blaster Master for the NES, and then tons and tons of other games, like Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario Bros. With Duck Hunt, as well as being able to use other really cool accessories. Every video game console had the NES Zapper, or the gun, as everyone knows. Every system had a gun, from the Atari to the Sega Master System to even other video game systems like the Odyssey. Now, of course, they didn't make them look as real as the Odyssey did, as you guys have probably seen in AVGN's video of the Odyssey. But anyway, one of the cool things was about the NES was it was something different that not many people were ever used to. Plus, it was in pure color. You could be able to do it right straight from your TV, and you could be able to carry the system around. Very light system. So we're gonna go ahead and move on now to the Super Nintendo that was released about 6 years later, after the Nintendo Entertainment System came out. After about 5-6 years after the Nintendo Entertainment System finally slowly went ahead and descended away from everyone's liking, Nintendo went ahead and decided to kick it against the Sega Genesis that came out that was using 16-bit graphics. Around that time, Nintendo was coming out with something even more powerful than the original NES. And so came the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, what was so special about this is it used the exact same features from the original Nintendo, but increased them even more, changing the system completely, as well as brand new controllers that were awesome. One of the other things that was also cool is they still stuck with cartridges. That made it so you just simply put it in on top, click it, and turn it on. Now, of course, also you could be able to plug in these with just an easy 7-port controller. Now, from my personal opinion, I believe that the Super Nintendo was one of the greatest Nintendo systems ever made. I mean, yes, there have been, of course, the GameCube, the N64, and the Wii, and of course the handhelds like the DS and the Game Boy. But I still think, from my personal opinion, that the Super Nintendo was just one of the greatest systems that was ever made, because it revolutionized the gaming industry for Nintendo. Not only did they just update the graphics even better, but there were so many great games that came out for the Super Nintendo, and they had so much support from different types of third parties like Acclaim, Activision, and tons and tons and tons of other types of publishers, even to the Mortal Kombat series that everyone knows from Midway. So, one of the things that a couple people didn't really like about it is the power supplies. These power supplies for video games were kind of ridiculous at the time. Basically what I mean by that is, let's go ahead and show off one of the Super Nintendo power supplies. As you guys can see right here, this is the power supply for the Super Nintendo. Now, of course, this Super Nintendo that I have right here, this is not the original Super Nintendo that had the nice flippable reset and power button. This one is the mini redesigned, because of such a great amount of respect and, well, as everyone knows, for Nintendo, they just congratulated themselves by doing so good on the system, they redesigned it to make it even more portable. Now, one of the things that I also like about it is it's so simple to go ahead and hook this up straight to the system because all you needed was the power supply and the AV cables. So it was something really different that a lot of gamers who owned a Genesis did not know, that the Super Nintendo was going to completely own the Sega Genesis in every way. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, there were lots and lots of games that both came out for both systems. But from what a lot of people have said, and both from my opinion as well, from owning a Sega Genesis in my younger years, the Super Nintendo owned the Sega Genesis in not only just gameplay, but better sound. Now, as I said again, certain people may not agree with me on this, and if you want to dislike for anything about this video, I mean, go ahead, but as again, this is my personal opinion about the systems, and I mean, if you don't like my opinion, well, I'm sorry. But anyway, I think that the Super Nintendo was one of the greatest systems that was ever made from Nintendo. And a lot of people would actually agree with me, because like I said, one of the things that was really cool about them was they made great games like Super Mario World. They made Super Mario All-Stars. They made the Mario Paint. They made tons and tons of other types of games like Star Fox. They made Super Metroid, one of the greatest platforming and sci-fi-ish action games that was ever released, and is also one of the hardest copies to find brand new nowadays. But one of the things that's also really good about it is the RPG that nobody can find anymore hardly, unless you want to pay tons of money for it, which was Earthbound, also known as Mother in Japan, which we will never see ever grace the Virtual Console ever. Anyway guys, thank you for watching part 1 of my history of Nintendo video. Stay tuned for part 2 when I talk about the N64 and the Nintendo GameCube. Take care. Later.